Hello. I welcome everyone to this talk. I'm calling it simply 7 skills you need for API documentation writing that you can use right now to get your own work done better and more quickly. So a little bit about me first. I am Robert Delwood. I'm a programmer, writer, and programmer writer. I'm a writer by education. Journalism. I'm a programmer by vocation. I'm self-taught since 6th or 7th grade, but my favorite title is that of programmer writer, where I get to combine both and write about programming to programmers. So I've been lucky enough to work at some pretty cool places in my career. I'm known for having been at NASA, Johnson Space Center in Houston. I was there for 15 or 17 years, but I also worked at Microsoft. That's where I got started. And I've been doing API documentation for a long time. Like I say, I got started at Microsoft in the late 90s. I think I was one of the first programmer writers they hired. I love what I do, and I have never looked back on it. So back again, but before we start, what is an API? What is an API, and why does it need documentation? An API is the set of commands that an application needs in order for another application to talk to it. If you think about it in terms of your browser, you want to contact Amazon to do some shopping. Your browser has to send a command to Amazon and tell it what to look for. That command is an API, and that's the only command Amazon will understand about getting what you need that you're looking for. So why do APIs need documentation? Well, APIs are not discoverable. There is no way a programmer can go to an application and figure out what the commands are. They have to be told what the commands are, what the parameters do, and if there's any notes, caveats, warnings, or any other things that they need to do. In short, the documentation is the application, and that's what makes this so puzzling, because companies will spend a lot of money on programmers and development teams and PMs to get an outstanding product, but unless they tell anyone about it through documentation, it's like they haven't published it at all. It's that great American novel that every writer has next to their computer. Could be the greatest book in the world, but unless you publish it, no one is going to know about it. So for this presentation, there will be some overarching concepts. These concepts apply to everything I'm going to talk about. So number one, all these concepts are used in API documentation writing. API documentation is a separate field within technical writing. I don't actually consider it tech writing because it is so programming based. The concepts are different. So you're leaving the comfort of a tech writing world and you're entering a documentation programming world. There'll be a whole new set of tools. The other thing is, these are tools, what I'm going to talk about are tools that you can use right now. So you'll need these tools if you make it into API documentation writing. These are all skills you need. But there are also skills that you can use right now in the work that you do right now. 3, this is an important concept. Learn expectations, not requirements. Too often, a company, when they're opening a requisition for a programmer writer will list requirements that they have to meet. They have to know a certain language. They have to know a certain tool. They have to know this. If you ever take a certification class in API documentation, the same thing happens. APIs have to contain this and this and this. While that's a logical approach to the system, I think it does a disservice to the community. Learn expectations. Learn what the readers of your documentation need to know, why they're using your documentation, and if you deliver those expectations, you have met the requirements of being an API documentation writer. This is not a science, it's an art. You're trying to communicate ideas fluently in new ways and effectively. And it's really up to the writer to figure that out. This is not as systematic as everyone thinks it is. Finally, and this is probably the most important thing in addition to learning expectations, learn the theory. After that, everything is just an implementation detail. If you learn the overarching concept of what you're trying to do, everything then becomes a detail that you can Google. For instance, if you learn a language and you learn looping within that language, the concept that you can repeat certain lines of code or tests or whatnot. If you go to another language, C#, a whole new language to you, you don't have to ask, does C# support looping? You know it does. So at that point, all you have to do is Google to find out what the particular syntax is. You're not learning the concept brand new again. In another example, for instance, is Flare. Flare is a great Madcap Flare. It's a great application, and if you only use Madcap Flare to do your job, you're going to do well. However, if you learn HTML, you're taking one step into Flare now. You can manipulate the HTML, you can change it directly, and it opens up a whole new set of options for manipulating the files. Going one step further, if you understand, ultimately everything is just a plain text file in the background. It's either XML or HTML, but it's plain text. You now can use any plain text tool to act on that. For instance, if you don't like the spell checker in Flare, you can find any spell checker in the world that acts on plain text files and go directly to the source. You have now opened up the entire application to whole new possibilities. Learn the theory. After that, everything is just an implementation detail. So what are the 7 things that you can learn now to do your job faster, better? And so I'll go through these. And okay, so number 1 is learning code. This is the stereotypical concept of what programmer writers do. We learn a language and we talk about it. Yes, you have to learn a language. I say I'm a programmer writing to programmers about programming. There's no way around not knowing programming. Learn a language now. Get that out of the way. However, learn any language. It really doesn't matter. That's the secret to this. There are a lot of articles, and a lot of people will come up to you and say and debate, which is the best language to learn. And my answer is, it doesn't matter. Learn any language. 80 to 90% of any language is going to be contained in another language. Like I mentioned earlier, if you learn the concept of looping, you can go to C#, you can go to Java, JavaScript, VBA, Basic. They all have looping. The trick is, as an API writer, you're not teaching the language to programmers. That's up to them. You're teaching your product to programmers, and now you're on even footing. But you have to know their lingo, their phrases. You have to know the concepts to begin with. I can almost always tell when the writer is not a programmer because the phrases aren't just right, and that's not the way a programmer would present it or use those terms. And if you can notice it, you're losing a little bit of your audience. You're losing credibility. So it doesn't matter what language, just learn a language. Go from there. Oh, 80% of all the comments. And it doesn't even have to be a language. It can be a scripting, macro, or automation tool. What I mean by this is there's a lot of automation possibilities out there. If you use Word, for instance, and this is the classic one, it has a built-in scripting language. Scripting is a means that you can record in action programmatically and either play it, or better yet, you can save it and play it back again. My phrase is if you do anything twice, automate it. But learn a scripting language. If you find it useful, and there's so many advantages. If you find it useful, others will too. You can share it, you can modify it, you can keep using it. It becomes very, very useful into your everyday work. But more on that in a moment. Also, and this is an important one, knowing a language makes you sympathize with the users. If you know the problems, the particulars of a language, you now understand the problems that your audience is going to get into. And at that point, you're sympathizing with them. However, that's not good enough for us. We don't want to just sympathize with them. We want to empathize with them. We want to go one step beyond just knowing a language. Step number two. Thing number two, you should learn now. Learn about learning code. And what this means is how you will learn something is how they'll learn. So if you don't know a language, you want to learn Java or C#, you go and let's say you get a book, you open it and read it. That book becomes API documentation. The author knows calls. They're trying to communicate those concepts to you, and they're trying to make it an efficient way of doing it through code samples, through discussions, through examples. By definition, that is API documentation. So you are now learning the same way that your audience will learn. Now we're empathizing with them. If you don't like something, if you don't get something, if you are having trouble learning something, they will too. Your pain, you have to take your pain, translate it into a solution so that your audience will understand. So you'll pay special attention to what was effective. What is it you learned, and how did you best learn that? What did you like about how you learned it? What was least effective? Did you have to read a page 2 or 3 times? Did you just never understand it? Why was it hard to understand? If you can solve this problem, you've actually solved API documentation problems entirely. Learn to empathize with your users by figuring out how you learn it, what you don't learn, and changing it. And by changing it, I mean take what you like and make it better. Take what you don't like and either discard it, or take what you don't like and make that better. Always make things better. Again, there are no formulas. There is no science to this. How you communicate to your audience is up to you. It's a style. So learning is personal and it's creative. Whatever you do, take it, make it yours, make it your signature, so that when somebody reads it, you know, in a company or something, they can say, oh yes, so and so wrote that because it sounds just like them. At that point, you have owned that topic. Number 3, learn to use code. So I promised you a minute ago that these are all things that you can use right now. Learning a language, even a spoken language, you can get a book and you can read about French, learning French, but it's not, you don't really know it until you use it. So so the best way to learn something is to actually use it. You want to learn language, sit down, write an application that does something, write a macro that takes a Word document and uses it and changes it to what you need to use. Learn what you've learned. Use what you've learned to do your job better. Oops. I'm sorry. So I'm sorry. Something got messed up here. So learn to use your code. Just a minute. What this also does is it teaches you to push what you've learned a little bit more. So you've written a macro in Word that creates a table. Excellent use of macro. You've turned it into a script. You can rerun it anytime. The most logical thing that happens now is that you ask, or someone will ask, can I add an open dialogue, open file dialogue to it? You're going to push yourself to learn it. This does, or you're going to push yourself to use new features. This does two things. One, it teaches you can push the tools, what you need to do to learn more, to add new features. And number 2, it teaches you to dig into documentation. The answer probably is there, but you might have to search a little bit to find it. Again, everything you experience, you want to remember so you can make their experience so much better too. But what you learn, you're using right now and making your job better. But you're also learning how to make someone else's job better. Either sharing the macro or learning about how best to learn about the code. So those 3 are probably singularly the most important things. Learn a language, any language. You learn how you learn about it. It's not really book versus video. There is that aspect, of course, but how did you get the knowledge, and how did you retain the knowledge? What made it easy to learn? Learn that and pass it on to your readers. Finally, use what you just learned for your own job. A lot of people will think that they don't need anything more in their job. They have all the functions covered. But if you sit back and think about it, there's actually a lot that can be added to it. For instance, when I was working on a Flare project, at the end of the project, we had to take the files, rename them, store them in another location, and zip them up. That is a batch file. That's scripting. You could write a script to do all that at the end. You learn a language, you learn about learning a language, and you use the skill in your job right now to make it more efficient. It's a win-win-win situation. So there are other things that we can learn here. Learn the command line. We think so. Everyone thinks DOS is dead. It's not. It's still very much alive in the API writing world. DOS is not dead, and Linux cannot be killed. They're going to be around. Now, DOS has a command line. A command line has its own syntax, its own use. It doesn't have a user interface, so it takes a little bit of learning to get accustomed to it. It doesn't have, like I said, it doesn't have an interface, but it does have switches. It does. You'll have to provide path names, output file names. Also, it is used extensively with API documentation. It's just APIs are still mostly done in an Apple world, in a Linux world, and almost all the tools are command line. I guarantee you, when you get into an API documentation job, you will have so many other things to learn about. You don't want to be fumbling with learning a command line or learning about how to learn a language. Learn that now, get it out of the way, so you'll be comfortable using it when you need to use it. Examples, a lot of examples are with command line. A lot of users are using get now, and get is a command line tool. There are graphical interface tools that let you interact with get, but I don't recommend using those. Just learn get from the no pun intended, from the get-go, and you'll be in such a more powerful position learning it. But in other aspects, there's tools called sudo, S-U-D-O, npm, several others that developers will be using almost on an everyday basis. Number 5. Don't worry about tools. Too often tech writers get caught up with the concept that they are their tool. So a person may know Flare, and they limit their world to Flare. A lot of companies will say, again, back to requirements, will say, you need to know Flare. My attitude that I just said, learn expectations and learn the more general pictures. So don't get caught up in any one tool. I guarantee you, in the API documentation world, you will use probably 6 to 12 different tools a day. So, for instance, you'll be working with open API files, either through a text editor, Notepad or Notepad++, or you'll be using an IDE like IntelliJ or Studio. You'll have to test REST calls with Postman or curl. URL. REST calls are database projects because they access a database, and real often it's convenient to have to go into a database yourself and make sure the information is valid there, or you'll have to be able to manipulate some data to test yourself. Occasionally you'll have FTP images up to a website. You'll have to know markdown languages. Usually all three of them, Markdown, HTML, and CSS. Word, I use Word a lot for table formatting. It's one of the best tools around. Excuse me. And regular expressions will become your best friend in API documentation. This is a search mechanism that instead of searching for terms literally, if you want to search for dog, you now type DOG. Regular expressions searches for patterns. So if you're working with part numbers, for instance, you'll know there's 6 letters. There'll be 6 numbers followed by a capital letter. You can't do a literal search for all the part numbers. You can set up a regular expression to find 6 numbers in a row followed by a capital letter. So in a typical day, what have I just done? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different aspects. You're going to have to move away from the concept of one tool and just realize you'll be using so many other tools. Another important aspect too, I mentioned Notepad and Notepad++, 2 applications I love on Windows. If you learn the concept of a tool, Flare, for instance, in theory, you can do everything in Flare in Notepad. You can do anything in Notepad that Flare does for you. If you get to that point, if you can truly use Notepad as a pure replacement for Flare, you have learned the general concept. Now, Flare is good. It does a lot of automation and quick things. But if you learn the idea and what it's doing to the plain text files, again, Notepad becomes an invaluable tool. I know some programmers who don't use an IDE like in IntelliJ or Visual Studio. They use Notepad, and they use a command line compiler to compile their projects, because that's the versatility they like. So all these tools, learn to realize you're moving away from the 1 or 2 tool world of tech writing into all these other tools. Again, if you learn to use these tools now, you'll be well ahead of the game. Now, this next one, number 6, is probably the least professional thing I'm going to say here. And by professional, I mean how it applies to your job. I've seen it done so many times. Never say, I know that. I've seen too many writers and API writers that when something is being explained to them, they say, oh, I already know that. Don't do it. It shuts the conversation down. First of all, you probably don't know it. And that's not disrespectful, and I'm not being mean, but you're asking a subject expert a question. So let them answer the question for you. Plus, if they start out on an angle, if they start out with one topic, they may be leading you to another angle. Let them talk. Let them go through it. You can ask probing questions. I don't understand that. What does that mean? That's fine. But let them talk and let them lead you to where they want you to lead. Plus, if you ask 2 people the same question, you're going to get 2 different angles on it. And it's that angle that's the flexibility of the documentation. You want to learn to appeal to different people in different ways. If you ask a question, let the person talk. Plus, like I said, it shuts the conversation down. They may actually stop the conversation right there and walk away. They may be unwilling to work with you in the future, or they may think you arrogant that you already know everything. That's not the persona that you want. Just let them talk, and never say, I know that. Number 7, last thing. Examples are everything in this world. If I thought I could write API documentation using only samples, I would. Samples have have so many advantages that it's almost mind-boggling. So one of the advantages of examples is copy and paste. Probably 50% of the time a developer goes to your document, they already sort of know what they want. They just want to see an example of what the parameter looks like. Is it supposed to be a number? Are there capital letters in it? Can you use spaces? If you have an example, it lets them copy and paste. I've always said that in order to be loved by your programmers, you have to appeal to an emotion, and that emotion is laziness. If they can copy and paste, you are so far ahead of the game anyway. They don't have to read. They don't have to figure out what you're saying. The example is there, and they can just move on. Like I said, it's an example of format. Most of the time, they just want to see an actual example. They know what the call does. They know what the parameter does. They just in an example, if it's a state, for example, they need a state name. If your example puts MA for Massachusetts, that's all they want to know. MA postal codes, and they move on. Anything that saves them time, they will love you for. An example is worth 1,000 words. Again, I have an example of this, but you can spend half a day writing a description what a parameter does, but one example just puts everything into context. So, for example, here's an example for the DOS command for copy. This is technically everything someone has to know about using copy to copy files. It's complete, it's technically correct, but it doesn't really help them right now. There's too much to read. They don't know what the format is. So give them an example. That's probably all they need to know. Copy, document name, location name. Everything else sort of falls into place. Copy, source name, destination. There's a few other filters here, but we can explain those by way of example too, which I don't have here. No, sorry about that. But these 5 examples do almost a complete job at explaining everything. So in the rest world, examples are more important because everything is code-based. It's not always the assumption that if you know the basic code call, that you can extrapolate the next one. There is still a lot of playing around with the call to get everything just right. So include, and there's no rule of saying you only have to have one example. You can have 3, 4, 5 examples. There are different kinds of examples. My API documentation, I require that every call have have at least two examples. One, the most basic call possible to that runs successfully, and two, a little more complex example, maybe using flags or redirecting output. Give them a little more advanced idea on what to do. There are other examples where you might have a chunk of code that has about 8 lines that uses your call in one place. There might be a little bit of setup to it. There might be a little bit of post-processing. And finally, there's something called the comprehensive example, where it's almost like a mini application. And it shows how everything ties together. You can never have, the bottom line is, you can never have too many examples in this. So I ran through all of this pretty quickly. I will. There are some questions I'll get to. If you don't hear your answer, write some here. I'd be happy to get them as time permits. There are some outstanding. Well, I don't want to put my example in outstanding. There are some outstanding web programming examples out there. Programmable web, by all means, go to. They have thousands, tens of thousands of APIs. Look through them. Look at the documentation. Again, see what you like, see what you don't like. Tom Johnson's site, I'd rather be writing, is a must-see site. You have to go to a site and look at his material. He has an outstanding number of topics. He has examples. He walks you through tutorials in details. There's an organization called API Docs. Visit it. Again, they give talks and there's resources. And finally, there's my site that has my ideas and pontifications about how the programming world should be. So let me go back and see what questions people have here. So somebody asked, what's the difference between an API and an SDK? An API, so API is a widely misused term. Let me back up here. An API, like I said at the beginning, is a set of calls an application uses. API documentation is the documentation required to understand each of those calls individually. An SDK is called a software development kit. It is not directly an API reference guide, but it is any other tool that you would need to run their APIs. There might be sample applications. There might be code add-ins to your project that makes working with their API better. It may be additional documentation, detailed how-tos. But an SDK is all the other things that you would need to help run or understand the topic that the API addresses. Do free resources like Code Academy work for learning programming languages? I can't honestly say yes or no. I've not visited many of them, but there are plenty of sites like that. My library offers Lynda for free to its members. You can get books. There are a few certification sites for being certified as an API documentation writer. Those are great for learning the business. By all means, I encourage everyone to look into this. Apparently, it's raining pretty heavy in Katy, Texas right now. So So somebody mentions Postman. Postman is a great application. It's intended to test API calls. It's an interface that you can enter the command. It allows you to enter variables as you want, and it returns the code for you to look at. You can look at it in detail. You can change variables quite quickly. You can play with it to really learn a call. I consider it the basic tool for all API documentation writers. Now there's another tool I mentioned called curl, and that's various. I don't know what the C actually means. Command line URL, C URL as in C, but it's a command line version that you can run API calls to. A lot of people like it for its simplicity. I don't think it's quite as versatile as Postman if you want to learn a call and see the call's components. There were some questions about regex, regular expression. So regex is not a singular tool. It is a group of tools, and individual companies implement their version of regex. So if you do a Google search, you're going to hit 20 or 30 of these, but they all do the same thing, and they all more or less follow the same guidelines and specs. It allows you to specify patterns to everything defined. Is regex for Unix and Linux? Absolutely. Again, it's a different implementation for each platform. I mentioned Notepad++, one of the finest plain text editors I've come across in the Windows world. It's not available on the Mac, but it has regex built in, and it's got the advantage that you can specify in entire folders. There are folder structure to look through. That gives you a lot of versatility. Let's see. So yeah, that's all the questions. If anyone else has any questions, we still have about 10 minutes. Otherwise, I'll call it short. But so I hope these may make sense to you. I'm trying to decomplicate the world of the API documentation writers. Writing. We need new writers in this industry, and those new writers will likely come from the tech writing world. I've seen one of the questions, not here, but at another presentation I gave, is do tech writers need any special preparation to become an API writer? Well, I covered a lot of them, but the funny thing is, about half the people I know in the tech about half the people I know who are API writers now sort of came into it accidentally. Their boss told them that they were going to start API writing, or they just took a leap into it without any preparation. So yes, the idea is you can go from the tech writing world to an API writing world. Keep in mind a couple things. If theirs is a programming world, so there is some ramp up, and you're going to have to adjust to their expectations. And two, learn expectations overall. If you do those two things, you'll have a pretty smooth transition to the world. But don't let anyone tell you it's complicated or it's beyond your means. It really isn't. Like I said, it's an art, and it's up to each writer to find the craft that best fits their audience. So
Yeah, Robert, you kind of mentioned learning, other languages. It's funny because I've always been kind of scared off by math and science, maybe because I'm female. But I love learning other languages. I learn French really easily, so I don't know why I'm scared of learning a programming language.
Well, well,
Maybe it's the same difficulty, or
well, like I said, about 80% of any one language is in common with another language.
oh, okay.
So if you bite the bullet and learn Java,
Mhm.
you almost already know C#. In
Oh,
fact, the transition to C# will be surprisingly similar. But the concepts apply to JavaScript, and I also broadened it. Learn macros. The concepts. It's not, maybe macros aren't 80% the same. They're 40% the same. But learn macros and learn the concept of programming, using code to get your work done. And you're on that road, and never stop asking, well, can I do this with it? Can I add this to it? Because almost every time the answer is yes.
I also have found that most of the time that most languages are fairly readable. And if you can read the code, you can probably figure out how to write it from there. Because I taught myself C#. Now, granted, I'm nowhere near as good as a programmer because I was never like formally taught, but I've learned enough to be able to implement, CSH in our code and things, write our error messages and things like that. So it's not. I know a lot of tech writers are intimidated by code, and I think I don't think it's as hard as people think that it is. A lot of it is just being able, if you can read it, which it's not as difficult to read it as you might think it would be.
Right. And that's what I'm trying to debunk here. There is nothing scary about entering a programming world. Like I said, you can read languages pretty easily. I recently looked at some French, and I know nothing about French, and yet I sort of could pick up the gist of it because the words are similar enough. In some cases, the variations are similar to English that I can pick up, whiffs of the meaning. So it's definitely easier in programming, and the switch from reading code to writing code will unfortunately take some practice. But find a project, find a task that you think is worthwhile, and just write a small script that does it. Give it a sentence and change and figure out how to change everything to uppercase. I was talking to Cindy earlier. Take a sentence and change it to all lowercase. If you can do that, and that'll take you half an hour to an hour, in my opinion, if you start out. The next one is actually going to be less time because you've learned you learned 60% on your first project. Absolutely. But I'm trying to debunk the notion that this is complicated or involved, and people make it sound very very intimidating. It's not. The industry needs new API writers. Absolutely.
I think that another thing that I'm not an API writer, but I am a tech writer that likes to play with code. But I think another thing that's intimidating for tech writers is the fear of breaking the code. Like before I learned how to write code, I was terrified of breaking it. Like, what if I break something? And I learned it's okay. Go ahead, break things. Don't check it in, test it. Oh crap, that didn't go as planned. And you just start drilling through and figuring out, and you learn more that way. I mean, I think I probably learned more from code that I wrote that broke than I did from code that just worked on the first try.
Right.
So I broke things a lot when I was learning. I had a lot of code that didn't work, and I learned a lot from that. So don't be afraid of breaking shit.
Yeah, breakable tools are are important. And keep in mind, no one is going to ask you to write code that goes into production or the final website right out of the right from being hired. They're going to test you out first.
Yeah,
And
there's usually a test server or something.
And in the Get world, which I think most people have gotten to, there's no way that you can check in bad code because it has to be verified by a second or third person. Our policy is a writer and a developer has to look at all of our check-ins.
Oh, that's a good idea.
So so it's highly unlikely that you're going to be asked to do anything you can't do, and probably impossible to check in bad code.
Yeah, and in my environment, well, my boss will look over code that we write, but nobody actually has to approve it. But we're in TFS, so I mean, I can build it on my machine. I can test it out and make sure that it works the way that it's supposed to be working. So it's not at this point. It's not very common for me to break stuff.
Absolutely.
I've
What
had it happen for sure, but it's also like not a big deal, you know. And you know, you just go and fix it. Like,
and one of my other ideas is that you do things for yourself. So write code that helps you personally in your job. And there's just so many advantages. No one sees it. It doesn't matter how clunky it is. They just care that you do what you said you're going to do. How you get there is no one's business.
True. Thanks so much, Robert. It
Sure.
really demystifies this for me.
I hope.
Gives me a little courage.